Hello, my name's Phil Okwedy and I'm here today at the Dinefwr estate where next year we will all be together at Beyond the Border. But for now, I just want to share a couple of stories with you as we wander around this absolutely spectacular landscape. Long ago, before there were trains or banks, and when it was the drovers rather than the telegraph wires that carried the messages, there was a young man named Will who lived with his parents on a rented farm in the Neath Valley, not far from here. But then one spring, first his mother and then his father died, leaving Will with nothing in the world but 5 gold coins that they'd kept in a little leather purse that you could attach to your belt. Well, Will wanted to use those 5 gold coins to continue renting the farm, but the landlord wouldn't hear of it. And so one morning he set out to see if he couldn't turn those 5 gold coins into something more, into a fortune. He soon found himself walking down the lanes towards Llandilo when he came to a place where there was a stone cottage with a tin roof, and opposite a stone enclosure in which there were 5 black cattle. But it wasn't the cattle that caught his attention. It was the old man sitting on the doorstep of the cottage, because he had great big tears rolling down his face and in his hand a carving knife. "Whatever is the matter?" said Will. "Oh boy, it's those cattle over there," said the old man. "I used to be a drover, see? And I've been fattening up those cattle all winter. And my plan was to drive them to London myself and sell them. And then the money I got for them now is my pension. But you know, this last winter, my hip, it's too bad, I can't do it. And no one comes past this way anymore, so there's nothing for it. I'll have to slaughter them and salt the beef." Will saw an opportunity to turn his 5 gold coins into something more. "I could buy them from you," he said. "They're not just any old cattle, boy," said the old man. "What do you mean?" said Will. "Well, sit down and I'll tell you." Lost beneath the creases and folds of the hills above Aberdyfi is Llyn Barfog, the bearded lake. And local legend has it that there, each evening at dusk, the Gwragedd Annwn would gather, the fairy wives. They would leave their otherworld home and they would come to graze their milk-white fairy cattle. And of course, as this was known in the area, when there was a knock on the door one morning of the little farm closest to Llyn Barfog, and the farmer, who was thin as a stick and had a wife who was even thinner than a stick, answered the door and found a woman dressed in green with long silver hair flowing down her back, he knew who she was. And when she asked for food, he brought her in and sat her down to share the little food that he and his wife had. And when this woman had finished, she drew herself up to her full height and she said, "Am fod yn caredig, byddwch yn fyny. For being kind, you will prosper." And then she left. "For being kind, you will prosper." Well, that bore into that poor farmer's brain all day long. He heard it in his mind. "For being kind, you will prosper. What good is that to me?" he said to himself. "What good is that to me? Eating my food, for being kind, you will prosper." But then, that night in the evening, when he went to get his own cattle in, what should he find among them but one of these milk-white fairy cows? And when he brought his own cattle in the shed to milk them, the fairy calf came too. And when he milked her, he discovered what milk she gave, rich and creamy. Over the next days and weeks, he discovered what butter, what cheese came from that milk. And over the next months and years, what calves came from that cow, until he had herds and herds of milk-white fairy cows. And he was no longer thin as a stick, but quite portly and well-dressed. But with wealth did not come wisdom. For instead of being grateful to the cow for all she'd given him, as she grew older and came towards the end of his life, he thought he'd squeeze the last bit of profit out of her. And so he began fattening her up. Well, news spread throughout the area that the cow was to be slaughtered. On the appointed day, the yard was full of people come to see the end of the milk-white fairy cow. As the farmer brought her out, a halter around her neck, many a person there must have felt something in their heart as they looked deep into the eyes, those doe eyes of the milk-white fairy cow. But the farmer, he had no pity. All he could think was how much he was going to make from the loin and the rib and the rump. He tied it to a post and called over the butcher, who rolled up his sleeves, put on an apron, picked up his cudgel, raised it high above his head and brought it down between the cow's ears. Boom! The cow fell to the floor. But the moment she did, a cry went up. Ah! Every head in the yard turned to search for the source of the cry. High above Llyn Barfog on a crag, a figure dressed in green, long silver hair, windswept behind her. Then the hills rang out with Codwch dawch adre. And at that, the cow rose from the dead. And she began to make her way out of the yard, out through the people, and up the hill towards Llyn Barfog. But she didn't go alone, because from all over the farm there came the rest of those milk-white fairy cows until there was a white line snaking up the hill. Well, the farmer ran after them, ran to the edge of Llyn Barfog, tried to put his body between the cows and the water, but one by one they brushed past him and disappeared back beneath the waters, back towards their home in Annwn, in the other world, until all the cows were gone, all save one. And that was a little calf that had turned from milk white to coal black. And that, said the old man to Will, is the calf from which those cattle over there are descended. Well, that's a good story, said Will, but I hope that doesn't put too much on the price of them. Now, how much do you want for these cattle? So Will and the old man agreed a price, 1 gold coin for each of the cattle. So he emptied his little pouch, turned over the 5 coins, and then he set off. And he drove those cattle. He drove them across flooded rivers, across mountain tops, down steep-sided valleys with ravens tumbling overhead. And as he went, he acquired the attire of the drover, a wide-brimmed hat, a long coat with deep pockets for hiding the money in, and a stick. And he drove those cattle through the lowlands where the buttercups grow, through the uplands around peat bog and bracken, until finally he drove them right into the heart of London to Smithfield Market, where he sold them for a pretty penny. And now, that little pouch on his hip, it was a quarter full of gold coins. And so with a spring in his step, Will turned for home. Just as Will was crossing Blackfriars Bridge, a strange little man jumped out in front of him. He had on a bulrush hat and wire spectacles, and he pointed at the stick and said, "Where did you get that?" And Will said, "From the tree that I cut it from." "And where was that?" said the strange little man. "From near my home," said Will. "And what would your name be?" "The name my father gave me. Now what do you want?" "I'm sorry," said the strange little man. "I don't mean to alarm you. But that stick, if you tell me where you got it, I think I can show you great riches." Will looked at this strange little man a little more closely, and he realized he was a Dyn husband, a cunning man, perhaps what we would call a wizard. And he felt the weight of those coins on his hip and realized that he could turn them into even more, and more is always good, right? So he agreed to take the little man and show him where he had cut the stick from. So for the next few days, Will and the Dean husbands travelled out of London, down through the West Country, across the River Severn, down through South Wales and then up the Neath Valley, until they came to a place where two rivers met. And between those two rivers, Craig Ddinas, a great rock 150 feet high. Will took the Dean husbands up onto the top of Craig Ddinas, pointed, said, "That's the tree that I cut the stick from." "Then help me," said the Dean husbands. And together they removed the turf, and they dug the earth between the roots, and then they ripped the tree out, and there was gravel beneath, and they cleared that away to reveal a large flat stone. They prized this up, and beneath it they found a set of stone steps going down into the darkness. Will followed the Dean husbands down into the darkness. As he moved along, flames on torches attached to the walls sprang up. At the end of this passage, there was a huge bell as big as a man. The Dean husband said, "Whatever you do, don't touch the bell." Will squeezed around the bell. And as he got into the cavern beyond, more torches, more flames, and he saw the floor was full of sleeping men, each man with a shield and a spear or a sword. Carefully, Will followed the Dean husbands in deeper, stepping over the sleeping soldiers until they came to the middle of this cavern. And there, sitting on a wooden throne, there was a bearded figure, chin on the chest, a crown on his head, which threw out so much light it seemed to have a light of its own. "King Arthur," said the Dean husbands, "and his sleeping warriors. They await the day when the black eagle and the grey eagle will go to war, and then they will awake and defend the Cymru. But for now, you see these two piles of coins, one of silver, one of gold. You may take from one, but not both. And if you take my advice, you'll take only what you need." Will didn't hesitate. He went straight to the gold pile, and he filled up that pouch on his hip. He filled it to the top, and then ever so carefully, he stepped back out over the sleeping warriors. But as he came to the place where the bell was, and he squeezed around the bell, that pouch, he hadn't allowed for it. Doing! There was a clanking and a clattering as warrior after warrior stood up. And from deep within the cavern, "Has the day come?" And from the Dean husbands, "No, brave souls, sleep on. The morning of Wales has not yet dawned." And there was a clanking and a clattering as warrior after warrior lay back down again. Will hurried after the Dean husbands. Once they were back outside and had replaced the tree, the Dean husbands said to Will, "Now, surely you have enough to last you a lifetime. But if some evil should befall you and you chance this way again, remember, do not touch the bell. Or, if you do, remember the words I spoke." And with that, the Dean husbands simply disappeared. Well, that night, Will took himself to the nearest tavern. He ate well, he drank well, and he slept well. The next morning, he got up and he set off for home, for the Neath Valley. But as he was making his way, he realized he was here now. He might never pass this way again. Why leave all that treasure there? And so he returned to Craig Ddinas, removed the tree, went down the steps and into the cavern. He made his way over those soldiers, and where that pile of gold coins was, he began to fill the deep pockets in his drover's coat. He filled them up. He was so heavy when he tried to move, he could hardly pick up his foot. He stepped over those soldiers, stepped over them, until he came to the bell. And you know what's going to happen. As he squeezed around the bell, dang, there was a clanking and a clattering. Has the day come? Will said, no, go back to sleep. He knew it was the wrong words, but they were on him before he could move. He felt gauntleted fists punching him. He felt armoured knees battering him. Elbows, the hilts of swords, they pounded, they pummeled, and then everything went flat. When Will woke up, he found he was on top of Craig Ddinas, blue sky and clouds above him. He was battered and bruised, and his hat was gone. And then he realised his coat was gone, his stick was gone, and when he checked, the pouch with all the coins in it was gone. He had nothing left. He began to look around for the place where the tree was, the entrance to the cavern, but there was no tree. He hung on his hands and knees, he began to scrabble, looking down into the grass for this place. He searched and he searched and he searched, but it was gone. And though he came back time and time again, he never ever found the entrance to that cavern. And he died a broken, penniless man.